Welcome, everyone, to the Player 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rade Stojsalovic.
And I am your co-host, Dave Leary. I am not wearing a festive Christmas sweater like Roddy is.
This is my famous, super cheap Bloodsport Christmas sweater that I bought, holiday sweater, whatever you want to call it. This thing is terrible. It is a poorly constructed synthetic fabric with a print over it. There's no knitting or anything. It is uncomfortable. It's not itchy, but it's hilarious.
Perfect. It is
And
perfect.
I'm wearing this to signify the year-end holiday special year-end review for 2025 episode.
That's what we're doing this week, right? We're talking about a bunch of stuff and what went on over the last year.
Sure are. All right, before we get into it, everyone, please hit the like or subscribe button. It helps us out. And with no further ado, let's talk about 2025, the year in gaming.
And what a year it was.
Yeah, it's this is an interesting year. There's some ups, some downs, a lot of great products, and we'll get into those in a little bit. But let's start with the numbers. Despite all the layoffs that continued in 2025, which frankly suck as an industry, there was growth in revenue this year. In aggregate, it looks like it's about 7% year over year growth. With about that on mobile. Console, smaller, looking like that grew about 4%, and then PC up 10% this year. These are all stats according to Newzoo, which, if you're not familiar with it, is sort of a stats aggregator and is a good place to kind of get directional information about what's going on in the industry. Man, I just like the vibes didn't feel like growth this year, despite the numbers.
Not when we are in the thick of it and seeing all our friends lose their jobs hither and yon, but I absolutely believe that games are still a big deal. I believe they're growing. I totally also believe that PC games are experiencing a higher level of growth. My 16-year-old son and his friends who 10 years ago would have been console gamers a lot of them have shifted to PC, and whether they're playing Roblox and Minecraft or more hardcore stuff, they seem to be moving there and getting together with their friends on Discord, and that's where I'm seeing the growth, at least anecdotally.
Yeah, and the stats back that up. It looks like we're just shy or about to hit 20,000 new games this year on Steam alone. That's crazy.
That's good and bad, right? I mean, tons of choice for gamers. Also very difficult to make a splash if you are a small indie game trying to get heard above the noise of 19,999 other games that launched this year. But it shows that there's a lot of market and appetite for games, as well as a lot of creative folks out there building them. So,
well, I think the appetite is right. I don't know about the market. Some large number of them, it looks like about 4,000 or 5,000 of those don't even recoup their submission fee on Steam, and the vast majority of those will just not be profitable at all. Yeah. And maybe that wasn't the goal for some of the devs, and that's fine. But with that many games, like there's no way any store is going to be able to solve discoverability for that at all.
It's a tough problem for sure. I don't know if you are saying it's bad that there's so many submissions, and are you advocating a solution to the discoverability problem?
So it's never been easier than it is now to make games. And I think in aggregate, that's a good thing. What worries me about it is it used to be, there's some predictability in this business, right? Where, you spend X amount of dollars on this type of game, you have a reasonably decent shot at making a return on investment, provided you market it. And what we really saw this year was sort of a continuation on the trend where like all of the rules that used to exist of how you build and scope a title and decide what you're going to build and market it, they just don't work like they used to. And so now success is like a lottery. And for professionals, like that makes it almost impossible to build a business out of things. And it's why you don't see a lot of investment in games anymore from publishers or VCs, because nobody's going to fund your lottery ticket purchase. Like that's sort of crazy. And so, yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, games are risky. They have always been risky, but now they feel riskier than ever. Certainly as someone who's, been trying for the last few years to figure out how to chart my own course in the industry, it is more of a challenge now. The rules that used to work don't seem to apply anymore. So I think you're dead on right.
Yeah. And like, the easiest thing to say is, well, we need to curate, but then that becomes gatekeeping on games. And I don't think that's necessarily a great idea. I mean, there's pros and cons. We could debate about that. It makes sense in some early stage ecosystems. I mean, hell, I was an advocate for it when I was at Meta working in VR on the Quest product. But at other points, it doesn't. I think the thing that we have to be really careful of is this could lead to devaluation of games where you're just competing for attention and you're going to do anything to get it. Like we've already seen the steep discounts that you have to do on Steam just to get noticed when the sales happen. We saw something similar in mobile where everything sort of raced to the bottom on prices. I remember when 99 cents was the thing and then free to play took over. And I don't see the same thing necessarily happening on console, but until someone figures out a way to make it less of a lottery ticket purchase and more of a business where you have a reasonably decent shot if you follow these steps to get successful, or at least to make a return, I just don't think it's going to be healthy for the gaming business overall.
Well, related, I know one thing you wanted to talk about a little bit this week was the first $80 game, right?
Yeah. So like there have been compilations of games like where they did the super secret, double secret collector's edition sort of packages where, you used to get the cloth map or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about base price on it. And so that happened for the first time this year. And, I don't want to get into all the economics of inflation and everything else, but there's sort of an interesting challenge in the games business, particularly in AAA, where costs have kept going up and up and up in these games. There's always been this ceiling of what you could charge for the game. And you see that once you pass about $60, adoption falls and people wait until it gets discounted. And so you're squeezed as a developer or publisher trying to make a business. Like, well, my costs are going up, but my price has a ceiling and my margins are shrinking. Now it's underwater. And I still have to make enough to pay for my development cost and whatever products I did that just, weren't hits, because not every game is. It's tough. I mean, yeah.
I guess I'd ask you two questions about that. One is, how much is the ability to reach a larger audience compensating for that downward pressure that you talked about in prices? I mean, your reach today can, if you hit, be a lot larger. So that's one thing I think that's interesting here. Another thing to think about is, I do think there are going to be some studios that can absolutely get away with charging $80 for their product. Rockstar springs to mind, maybe CD Projekt Red. But a lot of what we would consider AAA studios that are doing something that's not in that really top, almost quadruple A tier are going to feel pressure from $20 indie games that frankly are doing as interesting things or better things than a lot of AAA games are doing. And those are really appealing to consumers and they're providing a lot of value for the money. And those indie darlings are still making plenty of money for their developers.
Yeah, I think there's a long overdue discussion to be had, particularly in the triple or quadruple A, as you put it, space. Do players really want that much game? Or can the game be smaller and still be really high quality? And I think when you see some of these smaller, high quality indie games, like the answer is like, there's clearly space for that. Like, do I need 200 gameplay in this thing as table stakes? And maybe not. Maybe you could do something like we did back when you and I were working on strategy games with expansion packs, where you release the base game and then you release more content, and those that want it can buy it. And if you don't have to. You still have a perfectly self-contained game. I'm not talking about what we just did with DLC. It's more than that, right? It was like literally almost a sequel product that we would sell for about half the price of the base thing. Maybe that's a solution. Maybe it is more DLC for another product. But I think that discussion needs to be had because those two things have been colliding, the price and the cost of development, for a while now. I think what we really saw is it's come to a head.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Speaking of the year in games, and UGC was big this year between Fortnite and Roblox. I think Roblox paid over $1.5 billion to creators in 2025. That's nuts.
Yeah, that is crazy, and I'm glad to see it. Of course, that scene has been around for the hardcore for a while, the idea of mods and modding, but this is a whole new level of that stuff. I certainly think there are some open questions about, particularly in the case of Roblox, how much exploitation of their customer base they are doing. There are some certainly questionable practices along the way as they've built this economy, but there's no denying that this is big. And for the people who are into it and are building some UGC that ends up hitting, it's a great source of revenue and income and side hustle. I do think even more so than Steam indie space, maybe it is a lottery ticket, right? I mean, you have to be one of the top creators to get a piece of that pie, but there is a pie there and it's only growing.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I look at this. It's signifying a generational shift in how content is consumed. A lot of younger players looking for this type of content versus just elsewhere. So that's one thing to be aware of. And then, for folks that are in the industry, we tend to look at Minecraft, Fortnite, and Roblox not as games, but as platforms. And I think that's the right way to look at them because they're ecosystems big enough in their own right. Like they're bigger than Steam was when it launched, and it's just one product.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, building a platform for UGC has long been a dream of a lot of developers, I think. And certainly both Roblox and Minecraft have shown that if you hit, that's a way to go.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think the last thing, kind of touching on something you mentioned, ETA, one of the big pieces of news this year was delayed from 2025 to 2026.
Yeah,
And
we already talked about that some on a previous podcast, but yeah, that feels like a pretty big delay, but not the first time and certainly not the last time that a big budget game is going to decide it needs more time to bake in the oven.
No, it's not. And I think the interesting thing for this is like when those delays happen, there are discussions at the highest levels at every major game developer and publisher about if you were launching in the new window where GTA is coming in, you got to get out of the blast radius of that thing because it's going to suck all the attention out of the market and take all the dollars away. So a lot of people reacting to that, and we still haven't seen the full fallout of what that means for release slates.
For sure. Hey, before you move on, you had mentioned at the top of this segment of the discussion, console numbers have fallen off. Well, not fallen off, but their growth is smaller compared to mobile and PC. Are console games dying? Are we seeing the end of it? Or are they becoming more of a place for a particular segment of the audience? I know you pulled up some numbers that show that sports games are the biggest on console. Clearly, somebody that's getting together with their friends to just play Madden, that's the place to go to do that. But is there going to be another generation of consoles in the same way that there has in the past?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So half of all the top 10 console games were sports titles. So that's just an interesting stat. And you compare that to PC, and PC is shooters. It's just how it works on the genre. There's a 30-year low in terms of hardware sales on consoles. And there's a bunch of interesting stuff happening here. So it used to be there were material differences between PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo because they all use different chips and hardware architectures. And so it was really a lot of work to port as a developer from one platform to another. But now they're all using the same variant of an x86 chip, and at least on PlayStation and Xbox, and very similar graphics capabilities. And with everyone moving towards common engines like Unreal or Unity, porting is really easy. I mean, there's technical requirements and things that you have to do that are a little bit different between the two. Like the meat and potatoes work under the hood is pretty simple. And that means they're very similar to PCs, and you're starting to see a lot of console titles show up on Steam and PCs. And then, what is the differentiator of a console? And I'm not talking about Switch right now. We'll get to that in a minute. You're really looking at, from a development standpoint, a snapshot of a piece of hardware at a point in time that developers can target and optimize for, which should not be underestimated at how much impact that could have on how good a product can look. If you're not chasing a min spec and an optimal spec and you could put all your attention in that one thing, you could do a lot to make that great. And so did consoles die? I don't think so. I think there's always an opportunity for some device to live in your living room or somewhere that's a lower cost, barrier to entry than a PC. You don't have to configure it, and it just works out of the box. So I don't think that changes anytime soon. I don't know what Microsoft is going to do with Xbox. It seems like their moves are indicating that they want to get out of the console space. And I don't know if they are or not, but all the indications say that why would you compete if you're going to be doing Game Pass and go cross-platform with everything? I don't think Sony does. I think there'll be another console there. In fact, they've all but announced it. And what that looks like would not surprise me if it looked more like a Switch, where Nintendo is I think smartly building a handheld that also works very well connected up to your living room, so you could do social play just like a traditional console. I think it may push in that direction.
You talked about that generational shift a few minutes ago with, consumers today in this next generation may be looking for shorter experiences. I wonder if that also affects this console or not discussion. I could see cloud gaming kind of finally coming to the forefront. It feels like that technology is getting to the point where, hey, maybe you just hop onto your super advanced smart TV in 4 or 5 years and there's a selection of games. I think companies like Netflix have been trying to get into that for a while, albeit maybe not in the best way. So it feels like, just like there's competition across the space in the PC market, there's also going to be competition for consumers' attention for consoles. And I'm not sure, from my perspective, as somebody who plays a lot of games, I want to go out and drop $600 or $700 on a next generation console when I have so many other options available to me.
Yeah, I think you and I might not be the target market for that, but there's definitely a non-tech savvy gamer who just wants to pick up something and have it work, right? And so, like, your challenge with, if you're on PC, is like there's freaking OS updates and all sorts of nonsense that you have to deal with. And that frankly hasn't gotten that much better. In fact, it's possibly gotten worse with these force updates and a lot of stuff that's been going on there. Valve's got the Steam machine, of course, coming out. And so, like, the question there for me is, where does that price relative to the consoles? Like, and that fundamental question comes down to, did Valve buy their hardware before RAM prices and storage spiked? And if they did, man, I think that thing is going to sell out. If they did not, I think it runs into a lot of headwinds, and it's going to be much slower adoption because of a higher price.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I of course, I'm hopeful that those memory prices will start to come down soon, but I'm not particularly optimistic that they will.
Yeah, that's going to be brutal for all the hardware in 2026. For those of you that haven't read it, Micron is getting out of, they have this business called Crucial that builds consumer facing memory. They're getting out of that and moving towards selling higher margin RAM towards AI data centers and data centers in general. So you lose one of the big suppliers of consumer RAM. And there have been rumors about NVIDIA selling more chips into that space because, again, these chips can sell for a higher margin. It's more profit for these companies. And so are we going to get a crunch of hardware for graphics, for solid state storage, and for memory? That's bad. We're certainly going to see price increases, and those look pretty significant. And I just don't see that pressure relieving anytime soon. And yeah, that's not good for new hardware sales. Right?
Yeah, and of course, here in the States, American politics injects itself into the game industry as it injects itself into everywhere else. And tariffs are going to affect the price of this stuff too as we bring it in from overseas. We don't know the ramifications of that. It randomly changes from week to week, but it's certainly going to be an impact on this as well.
Yeah, the thing I learned working on hardware is hardware fluctuations take a lot more time to work through the system. And so, it takes time to provision a factory and to build the line and get all the materials on that. And so you can't just say, well, make more RAM. Like, great. That could take a year until that's in place to get into that market. Maybe a little bit less. Some of these places, if they have capacity, could move pretty quickly. But what worries me is if there's a place that they could sell into and make a lot more profit, why would they then try to get more into the consumer space and fulfill that if they're making more money over there? And that's why I think this isn't going to resolve anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's right. Hey, we should not leave the hardware discussion. You kind of teased this, but without a little mention of the Switch 2 launch, which is a big deal. I've not been a big Nintendo fan for a while. I certainly respect what they do and think they make great product. I don't think I'll be buying a Switch 2. I did get an original Switch, but I didn't use it very much. I'd be curious for your take on how you think the Switch 2 is going to do.
I think it'll do pretty well. They haven't launched their big must-buy Switch 2 only titles yet, and we'll see what happens. Like, historically, when Nintendo launches a Mario or Zelda and they put it exclusively on a new console, that thing sells out. And I don't think that's going to change. Like, that fan base is like, they just turn out again and again and again, year after year. I have a Switch 1, haven't bought a 2 yet. Doesn't mean I won't. It's just kind of where we're at. It's just, I didn't see the need to do one this holiday season. My kiddo wanted some other stuff. And so we've got Labubu's and other crazy stuff. Hopefully she can't hear me because she's home from school right now. And she's not going to watch this podcast until after Christmas. So
excellent. Does she watch our podcast?
She watched it because she talks about her favorite YouTuber on Minecraft has now reached 1 million subscribers, and she
Hmm.
asked me how many I had, and
35.
yeah, so yeah, hit that subscribe button, please, so my daughter will not look at me with disdain. That would be
Don't
awesome.
make.
Yeah, so moving off of hardware for a bit, let's talk about the year 2025 on the business side. Like you mentioned it at the beginning, a lot of our friends are victims of studio closures and are just out of work. And this market is the toughest I've seen in 30 years. It's rough.
Yeah, and I'd like to highlight a couple. I think there are some that there's not much to do about when the Embracer Group falls apart and there's all the fallout from that. Some of those studios are going to go away, but there are other studios I look at, and particularly in a market where, as you mentioned, we're still getting 7% plus growth in games. It's hard to understand some of these closures. I think about studios like The Initiative that built Perfect Dark. I think about Netflix shuttering Boss Fight, which was one of their lead mobile studios. I'm going to go back one extra year to 2024 and cheat a little bit and talk about Arcane Austin, which has a legacy with Prey of being one of the only studios really working on certain genres of games. And then they have one misstep with Redfall, which by all accounts, they were kind of pushed into making some of the decisions there against their better judgment and advice. And they get shut down after a single misstep. It's just a tragedy, really. And honestly, I still worry about veteran developers just bailing on the industry, people who don't know how to find their way in this current market, and the short-sightedness of some publishers in terms of shutting some of these studios down for short-term profits without thinking about the long-term future.
Yeah. I mean, last year we weren't doing this podcast, but I'd had discussions with people where I thought in 2025, publishers would start to look ahead and realize that their content pipelines were way too empty and they would need more content, and they would hopefully make that realization before it's too late, because once you're in the middle of it and you need more content, you can't go say, well, I need X more games this year. Well, with dev spans taking 2 to 5 years, you got to look ahead to see that stuff. So yeah, it's tough to see that without being, I don't like to be all doom and gloom, but I do think a lot of those jobs are in the US in particular are not going to come back. I think as a labor center, we're very expensive compared to Europe in general and other parts of the world. And, I think that's where the growth is going to be. And so, if we lost 20,000 jobs in the US and Western game business in general, I think maybe half of them come back. And maybe that's generous uh, over time, and that's scary. I think a lot of people who are either going to be doing early retirements or are going to get out of the business and do something else. I mean, I've seen LinkedIn posts where people were basically saying they're going to be homeless because they can't find a job in the profession that they've spent the first 5 or 10 years of your career. And it's heartbreaking to see that. These are talented folks. I don't think it's fair or reasonable to put the blame on this generative AI, because that's not what I'm seeing for why these positions are being eliminated. I think it's a combination of the unit economics that we talked about earlier of the games business, cost of labor, and frankly, some greed. I think is part of that. Like profit margins need to be maintained. I get it. Public companies have to do what they have to do. They have an obligation to make a return for their shareholders. Private equity is even tougher on that. And when you have less predictability on whether or not you're going to get a return on your investment in a game, people start to get nervous and they cut costs, and it sucks.
Maybe it would be okay for some companies to make, 20% profit instead of 40% though, right? I think some games can be pretty safe bets provided your expectations are not completely out of whack.
I don't know. I mean, 40% margins, very, very few game companies make that. Like we're talking about like the 1% that get
Agreed,
margins
but
like that.
agreed, but it feels like that's what publishers are striving for and expecting, right? They're looking for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to all of them. Like that number's a little bit high from what I've seen on return on investment. What I have seen, and this is just a continuation of a trend that's been going on for years, is just an unwillingness to take risk. And a friend of mine we used to play a lot of this game early in my career called Cyberball. It was a robotic football game that was out in arcades, and you could play different defenses and everything. And one of the guys that I used to work with said, "There's this thing called a prevent defense, and the goal of that was to prevent the other team from getting a big play." And he made the observation in cyberball and also in real football that a prevent defense prevents you from winning because you're not playing to win anymore, you're playing not to lose. And that feels like what is going on with this lack of risk taking is you're just trying to put out content so you don't lose your shirt instead of trying to put out great product that's going to sell. And I think you get into a self-perpetuating negative feedback loop with that.
I agree 100%. If I can give you a great example. If you were to look on paper at what our favorite current game, Arc Raiders, was pitching, it's a third-person extraction shooter, which is a little risky on its face. It is coming out from a studio that is not as well known as some of the other big players in that space. And it's launching in the launch window where Battlefield 6 and Black Ops 7 both drop. That seems like a recipe for disaster on paper, and yet it's one of the most acclaimed games of the year. Some of this is due to the excellent execution, but also just the studio understanding the product they were building and being willing to take some risks within the genre and try to do something a little bit different from what was happening out there. That's where the big hits are, and that's been the history of the game industry over the years. We were talking about Civilization a couple weeks ago. That was a huge risk for Microprose. Very few people in the studio believed in that product when they were working on it. So, I feel like the game industry has to learn this lesson over and over every few years that, you have to take some risks. But if you do it right, the payoff is enormous.
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on. I mean, you and I remember in the early days of RTS, having both worked at Westwood Studios, some of the stories about how they pitched that to publishers, and turn-based was the way to do that. And the founders were like, no, that we think this is going to be big and better. They're like, no, only people want to play turn-based for strategy games. And sure enough, they come out with Dune 2 and just flip the table on the strategy genre. And turn-based games still exist, but they're tiny.
Well, and it's funny that you say that because I was about to say, hey, it's cyclical, right? On the RPG side, real time with pause, the style of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, that was the thing for a long time. But then Baldur's Gate 3 comes out, does a turn-based game, and suddenly turn-based is hot again. So I think it is cyclical. I wouldn't necessarily tie it to one specific genre or not. But the point is that studios that do something that's a little outside the norm of what's currently popular can often show the way forward for the next big round of hits.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's right. I don't know how much of a cycle we are in the turn-based thing, but I see the point on Baldur's Gate 3. More stuff this year on the business side. There's a lot going on with unionization. There's good and bad. Like there's the first.
No, it's all good, Roddy. It's all good.
Well,
come on.
Hear me out on this. So there's the first industry-wide unions, United Video Game Workers Local 9433. So that's a thing. There's QA groups, which are often the groups that are just really suffering the most, unionizing, and we're seeing results from that. And the downside is there's the whole Rockstar anti-union thing going on that I haven't seen new details since we talked about it last time. But I think it's more good than bad in general. And I don't know if this trend continues next year. I would caution to say, with the layoffs and everything, I wouldn't look at unions to save everybody from that. I do think there's a good place for unions for fair representation. I think it could help with some of these concerns around AI usage that people have had with products. And I expect the trend is going to either continue next year, which is my optimistic outcome, or we might see a dip and then a resurgence again. And I'm not sure which of those is going to happen.
Yeah, we dug into unionization pretty deep in one of our early podcasts. I don't want to necessarily walk through all my championing of it once again. I am happy, as are you, to see more efforts along those fronts. I think, it does provide some, hopefully, protections for people when they are between jobs. That's really, I think, the main purpose for a game industry union, because I don't think this is changing anytime soon. A lot of people are between jobs a lot of the time in our industry. That's where I'd like to see unions really help out folks.
Well, you and I have talked about this before, but one of the things I think is going to happen is we're going to move to a lot more contract services work where there will be a core team working on the game and then we'll get augmented by contractors. And I think that's a case where unions could help out a lot because as an individual, you're not privy to contract information the way a company would be because they see a lot more of that. You're probably not going to have your own lawyer. In fact, you're almost certainly not going to. You're buying your health care in the US privately, which that's a whole separate thing that I don't think we need to get into. But if a union could come in here and say, hey, you know what? Here's what a contract looks like for union workers, the same way that SAG does it for their actors. Oh, and by the way, we've pooled these thousands of developers together and gotten a group insurance rate that is better than what you could buy otherwise. And you could get decent coverage on that and have some continuation on that. Maybe a retirement plan as well. Man, that is good for everybody. That is good for individual game devs. It's good for the companies that subcontract to them. And it's good for consumers too, because you've got this talent that's just available to make these great games.
Yeah, 100%. Hope we see some more movement on that going forward.
Two more pieces of news on the business side of the year. So there was the big EA buyout by private equity that happened earlier this year. So the details on that one, the deal closes next year, so we haven't seen any changes to the company this year. I got a lot of friends still at EA. I think you do as well. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Like there's funding involved in that, so the company is going to have to service that debt that was used to buy them. Does that lead to different decision making in terms of their product lineup? I don't know. I think we're going to have to wait and see.
I would anticipate at least a round or two of layoffs from that change, wouldn't you?
So this is different than a merger and acquisition type of deal, like when Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard, right? When one of those deals happens, you find the groups that you're duplicative in resources. So like, you know what, do you really need two different corporate development groups? No. Do you need two different finance groups? No. And so you figure out what you need to service the new business, and then there's going to be layoffs anytime you do that. Well, that's not happening with this M&A thing. This is going to be about, you're basically taking a loan out. I'm grossly simplifying here. And you have to service that debt, and you don't get to have a bad game and say, well, you know, we'll make it up next time. You still have to pay it. Their decision is going to be made to pay that debt. I don't know when they manifest, if we're going to see that in 2026 or beyond, but it's certainly possible that EA just keeps firing on all cylinders like they did this year with Battlefield and Madden and their other titles, and they're printing money and it's fine. It's also possible that doesn't happen. And in which case, yeah, cost cutting and layoffs would probably happen. And I just don't know which is going to happen.
Yeah, hard to tell right now.
I hope it's not the layoffs. I hope they have
so too.
Continual hits.
Let's all knock wood and say 2026 better be better than 2025 for the game industry.
Yeah. And then the last thing, you know, I can't leave the generative AI debate alone. So we'll finish the year in business with that. That's been a big topic this year.
For sure. You and I have talked about it multiple times and probably will again.
And it's not ending on quietly either. There's some big news that just happened with Claire Obscure. Expedition 33 just got an Indie Award pulled or rescinded because they supposedly used some amount of generative AI in the game.
They did, and we should clarify for anyone who got a little confused by this news that this is not the big game award that they got. It's the Independent Game Awards, which is a separate organization that pulled the award from Expedition 33. I think I know where you're going to go with this. I will say that, you know, the rules of that award show are pretty clear, and I have not noticed the developers of Expedition 33 really biting back on this at all. The rules of that award say no use of generative AI at all. I don't think anyone's questioning that in the initial launch, though they have replaced it now, Expedition 33 did use some generative AI assets. So I love Expedition 33. I think it's a fantastic game, deserves all the accolades it gets. But, you know, they broke the rules in the same way that Pete Rose did in baseball. And at some point, you pay the price for that.
Man, this pisses me off to no end because it's really hard to get accurate information on it. So how did they use generative AI matters.
There were a few assets, just a few assets, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone is arguing that it materially made the difference in the game. So it was a fringe thing. Did they even know about this? Because supposedly one thing I read was a subcontractor used some, and maybe they didn't know about that. In which case, I think it's absolutely stupid to pull an award on this. This would be like, like that episode of an old episode of The Simpsons where Homer was filling out an application for Lisa, and there was a thing that says "Do not write below this line," and he wrote "Okay," and she got disqualified for the whole thing. It's just, yeah, okay, it's dumb. I'm also watching people tear apart Sandfall for not being a true indie, whatever that actually means, and like, man, like, we just do not need to be tearing down successful titles, especially ones like that kind of come out from a new developer and really kind of break the mold in terms of what was being built. I just don't think it's helpful. I don't know why we do this.
I'm with you on that. I don't like when developers get torn down, and I think, as I said, Sandfall deserves all the accolades. Some of that questioning of whether a studio is indie or not, I will argue is a little bit valid. I mean, Sandfall, the credits on Expedition 33 are pretty long, and they had some good funding based on their rep. If you are looking at them in the same category as something like a Blueprints, which is made by a fairly small team, they're not at that same level. I'm not arguing they're AAA. They don't have the funding of a Rockstar or CD Projekt Red, but calling them indie is a bit of a stretch when you're talking about 1 and 5 and 10 man shops out there trying to do games on Steam. They're not in the same category, and indie starts to lose meaning if the definition includes both Sandfall and a one-man developer.
I don't know what indie means anymore.
Yeah,
like,
that's
honestly,
fair.
like, what's the line?
Yeah.
Is it it's like, if you're more than 5 devs, you're not indie? Is it more than 20? Is it you received any external funding that mean you actually got paid during development?
Right.
Did you not suffer enough? Oh, you didn't suffer enough, you're not indie. I'm like, unless we're going to crisply define it, it's like, it's kind of the same thing. Like made up crap like AAA versus quadruple A. Like, what the hell does that mean? Like that, like I've been doing this a long time. I couldn't, like, if I was called to testify in a court about, like, well, what is this? I'm like, I don't know. I'll know it when I see it. And like, maybe that's fine for, if you're the Supreme Court defining what's pornography versus what's not. But like, this, I don't think we need to be doing that here.
Yeah, it's fuzzy for sure.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into some fun stuff. Where do you think we're going to go in 2026 in gaming?
Boy, I would love to say that 2026 is the year of the resurgence and that studios recognize that very thing that you're talking about, which is, hey, they're not going to have new titles in a couple years if they don't get some development going. I hope that's what happens. I'm not necessarily optimistic that it will. I do think we're going to see some great games built. I think we're going to see the impact of some of the new titles this year that have been very innovative and exciting. Games that kind of set the mark and show what can be done in genres tend to make new genres happen. I think Arc Raiders is one of those games. I think Expedition 33 is one of those games. I think we're going to see some great new stuff, and I always get excited about that.
I'm going to start with the no risk prediction, and that GTA comes out and it will be the biggest game launch in history. Like, that should not be a surprise to anybody when that happens. I think we're going to see a lot more breakout indie hits. What I'm wondering about is, will we see a successful indie dev follow up with another title? Because that's really hard to do. Great, you did one, you won your lottery ticket. If you do it twice, then I would argue that clearly moves you out of the indie category if you could pull off a hit twice. But that's not an official definition. That's just a Rade definition. I think we'll see that, but I'm really curious to watch this continuing generational shift in games and how they're consumed. Gen A, Gen Z, friend slop games, just quick, react to the market. Is AI used in that? Does it even matter to those customers or not? That to me is where there's just a lot of excitement, because like that frankly is the future of the game business, whether us older crusty gamers like it or not. And I want to see how that develops. So I think that's going to be the year for Gen Z, Gen Alpha games.
That will be exciting to watch. And my son, as I mentioned, may be an aberration because he tends to like weird old school stuff, and I think that's my fault. But it will be fun to see what he and his friends adopt. It'll be fun to see what your daughter and her friends adopt as they come up and get into games. Every generation's different. I look forward to seeing what's coming, as I always do.
I also think, related to that, nostalgia will continue to be big. And there are companies that are sitting on a lot of great classic game IP that's just nothing is being done with that. I think we're going to start seeing some of that stuff break through.
That's dead on. I mean, we totally saw that at the Game Awards when there were so many new, in quotes, titles that were coming out that were clearly farming nostalgia territory and, you know, bringing back old IPs that we haven't seen for a long time. I think retro is going to be cool again.
And I want to see a modern take on Populous, a modern take on Syndicate. Those were a blast. Bring those back. Let's do something with that. And then, man, I would do Final Fight again if somebody brought that back.
Wow. You may be the only one there.
Come on. I know at least, like, my friend Mike would definitely do that. And I know some, because he tried to chase after that with the title that we worked on before. And I know some of the devs who built that would love to see if that came back.
Well, I'm glad you have a passion for Final Fight.
Oh, come on. That was a blast.
It was a good game.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm also thinking 2020 might actually resolve the AI use in games debate. I think if not, it's going to come to a head in 2026.
You are being optimistic that debate is going to get resolved because you want it to be resolved, but I do not think it will be resolved. I will give you the opposite prediction. I think we're still going to be talking about this at our end of the year summary and next year.
It is, as I've discussed with some folks on LinkedIn, it's moved into the realm of political or religious debates where it's just really hard to have a factual discussion anymore without tempers getting heated. I will say, in my mind, I've segmented consumer AI tools, which I would call ChatGPT, from professional AI development tools, which Comfy UI and a couple of the other ones. They're very, very different in how they're used. And a lot of the concerns that you might have for one versus the other just aren't applicable. So like a lot of these are locally run. So you don't have it's sucking up all the water and power kind of debate. That's just not a thing. It's stealing artists' works. Like, well, if it runs locally, I choose what I train it on. So it doesn't have to be like that. Maybe we'll get into that nuance.
That's fair. I'll leave you with one thought on that just to mull over while we break. You and I think, both agree there are absolutely ethical uses for that tech. And I think both Sandfall and Larian and their uses are well on the ethical side of the line in terms of how they used AI. I think we would also agree there are some blatantly unethical uses of it where you literally are just stealing stuff to make slop that you shove out in a week with no thought. The problem right now with this debate is that line of where the cutoff between ethical use and not ethical use is very fuzzy. And I think that's what you're feeling people kind of push back against. It's like, hey, you could tell us all day long that you're doing ethical stuff, but we don't understand this. The customers don't yet understand the nuances that you and I do from having worked with the stuff. So I think it's just a hard conversation to have. And I don't think we can shortcut that conversation as much as you and I might want to so we can move on with whatever we're building. People are clearly pushing back.
I 100% agree with that. And I think the reason why I'm optimistic it gets resolved in 2026 is how quickly it's accelerating. The slop is going to flood the market, and I think it's going to all fail. And it's going to then differentiate between ethical and sloppy use of AI. And it's going to be pretty clear which camp a product falls in versus where you're at right now, which you're saying are kind of over here. I think early 2026, first half, it starts to do this and diverge. It splits apart.
That's a better and more nuanced argument from you, I think, and I will take that and even tentatively agree that I hope that it becomes more clear, the distinction.
All right, I'm getting better at explaining my positions about this versus just telling people, no, you're wrong.
There you go.
It's going to be a thing.
Well, that's because you and I talk, Roddy. I make you better. That's what I do.
Thank you. This is true. All right. Well, that's it for our 2025 year in review, and we'll be back in January with a brand new podcast.
Are you sad that I wore a dull gray shirt instead of a festive holiday sweater?
That's on me. I didn't send the message that festive hats or ugly sweaters are a requirement for this one. So I saw this in the closet. I'm like, man, I don't know when I'm going to wear this year. I'm going to put it on.
Well, maybe on our first podcast of the new year, I'll wear something more festive.
It's the best $10 sweater I've ever done.
That is an excellent $10 sweater, no doubt. I will see you in the new year.
Likewise. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.